In this module, we're going to look at a tale of two teams. One team will be a very diverse team, and one team will be a rather homogeneous team where people have very much a similar characteristics. So, if we first of all look at John's team, the rectangle represents his operating environment. John's highly intelligent, very well experienced as well, and recruits lots of people just like him. And if you notice, what is beginning to emerge is that his team doesn't really, even though each individual is very strong, they don't really cover much of the operating environment because their skill set overlaps too much. Now, if we look at Jane's team, similar operating environment, but this time Jane recruits people from very different backgrounds from her. And again, here the picture is beginning to emerge that there's a lot better coverage of the operating environment due to the diversity of people that Jane's been recruiting. In a diverse team, there's naturally going to be more potential for conflict. And people report less satisfaction because they have to work harder to overcome their differences. So what needs to be in place to make sure you make a success in Jane's team? We're going to look in future modules at something called psychological safety, which means everyone feels absolutely safe and secure that it's okay to be themselves and voice their opinions, even if they're different from other people's. Now we're going to look at two characters from history that demonstrate these different approaches to team building. On the one hand, we have Hitler, who heard what he wanted, and after 1941, he removed independent thinkers and was only told what he wanted to hear, not what he needed to hear. On the other hand, Churchill actually created a bad news department. He recruited independent thinkers, including leaders of the general strike. And it was only them who could give him the honest advice that he needed to hear. So, diverse teams do better, but they don't think they do. And their self-perception of their effectiveness is lower than that of homogeneous teams. Also, their confidence is lower. However, their actual task performance far exceeds the task performance of homogeneous teams. And why is that? And there are a few reasons. Partly they have to work harder to overcome the differences. They have to speak up. So there's less groupthink. And there's actually more social intelligence in diverse teams. However, we have to be aware of something called homophony. And that is the tendency for people to gradually, almost subconsciously, pile in behind the most influential or loudest person, often the team leader. And we see that often as teams mature, they can homophonize. And then people who don't fit in will actually leave. And the team will be all the poorer for it. So we've built our diverse team, and diversity is having a seat at the table. So now we need to make sure we're being inclusive. And inclusion is about having a voice at the table. And I love the phrase, if you're not deliberately including, you're probably excluding. So here are some tips to encourage inclusion. First of all, if you're the team leader, make sure you speak last, or even if you're just an influential person in the meeting. That way other people will have permission, if you like, to voice their opinions. Ensure everybody's heard, and perhaps one way of doing this is to go around asking everyone to make a contribution, and that way even the quietest people will be heard. I even heard one CEO say, I only want to hear from people who disagree with me. We'll be looking later on at a technique called Edward de Bono's thinking hats. Now, particularly these days when we have some people face-to-face at a meeting, some people dialing in remotely, it's all too easy to ignore those dialing in remotely. So we need to be extra careful to ensure they're included. And finally, we'll be looking later on at something called in-group and out-group bias. What this really means is that we have to be very, very careful that we don't have favourites. And I mean, this is natural that we get on with some people better than others, but we need to make sure we don't show any favouritism. So, what 1% changes will you make to ensure that you maintain diversity within your team?